So my personal healing journey involved something that was called adrenal fatigue. And because it was given the name adrenal fatigue, my assumption was that my issues were in my adrenal glands. And it turns out that my adrenal glands were fully capable of making cortisol. They just were getting the incorrect signals and stimulus. And so I want to talk a little bit about this from a slightly different perspective involving light and a specific region of the hypothalamus called the paraventricular nucleus. So in order for the adrenal glands to appropriately produce cortisol, they have to know that it's morning time. And I was never giving my body that signal of morning, at least not the morning transition that we want to see. So in order for the brain to perceive that it's morning, it needs to perceive a balanced amount of blue and red light, which happens at sunrise and then as the sun goes slightly higher in the sky. I was always missing that time of the morning. I was never going outside in that time of the morning because I would get to work at 5 o'clock in the morning. I operated a gym and I was flipping on all the lights, essentially going from a dark drive to work to every light in the gym on, which then all of a sudden fast forward my brain to the middle of the afternoon. I was never correctly timing the start of my day. And so over the course of time, also just conversely, I was never timing the night appropriately. So I never had the appropriate melatonin stimulus in the morning, nor did I ever have the appropriate melatonin surge at night. These are timekeepers in the body, and these are hormonal release signatures of daytime for cortisol and melatonin for darkness and nighttime. And so can you imagine what happens when the brain doesn't receive the correct signals? Those hormones are not released accordingly, which is why my cortisol was flatlined when I had it tested multiple times. It wasn't because my adrenal glands were incapable. It was because I was not stimulating the release with the correct signal of morning light. So first and foremost, when I started to see adrenal fatigue as working with signals in my brain, it shifted everything. And so you've obviously been here for a while. You hear me talk all the time about light signaling. So I'm not going to dive any deeper into that. That is all laid out if you're a practitioner who works with clients who have adrenal fatigue and want this perspective, including what I'm about to talk about. Get my course called the Adrenal Fatigue Fix. Yes, it's meant for individuals, but you know me, I dive into the science and it very much has a great clinician's lens to it for you to work with clients with adrenal fatigue through this perspective. So I was not giving my brain the correct signals. So I was giving it the correct light signals, and I wasn't even thinking of what were called secondary Zeitgebers either, or time givers. So not only was I giving the incorrect light signals, but over the course of years, I was skipping breakfast. I was essentially eating at 3, maybe not 3 always, but maybe between noon and 3 in the afternoon. I was intermittent fasting. And so when we don't give our body the correct light signal, the body tries to key in on other time-giving situations in the body in order to tell time. And so meal timing is one of those things. And so what I needed to do was sync my light with my meals. That was very, very important. That also optimized the leptin signaling, which can play a whole role in this as well. So that was off. I was also elevating my body temperature first thing in the morning, when technically we want the body temperature to be dropped in low and then have a nice gradual increase. And so I was doing a lot of stuff that was really messing with time signals in my brain and my body. And so what happened over time, as these wrong signals were going into the hypothalamus, a part of my hypothalamus that receives inputs from both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches of the nervous system, called the paraventricular nucleus, it got inhibited. It stopped firing off information, or it stopped firing its different loops accordingly, because the signaling was so chaotic. And so essentially what we had was an inhibition of the paraventricular nucleus. Ultimately, this was why my cortisol secretion was suppressed, because the PVN was not communicating correctly with the adrenal glands. And so as the adrenal fatigue progressed and started to just get worse, and the symptoms got worse and worse, the PVN, the paraventricular nucleus signaling, also got worse. And in fact, that area of the brain oftentimes reduces repair. It stops neurogenesis in that area. It essentially kind of just atrophies, if you will. Not exactly that, but these signaling and the repair there just gets neglected. It just gets inhibited. And so as I was working on light signaling, which made a huge difference, and I was signaling the start of the day with not only light, but meal timing, which also made a very big difference, and was signaling darkness in the evening, which then allowed melatonin to surge accordingly and allow my body temperature situation to also signal the correct time of day. As those things were going on, I also had to do things to actively turn on, if you will, or disinhibit my paraventricular nucleus. And that actually involved things using cold exposure. So a cold face plunge, and when I couldn't do a cold face plunge, I did cold hand dips or cold feet, even on top of the snow. And the reason why I chose the face, the hands, and the feet, the soles of the feet, is because the forehead, the palms, and the soles have a type of skin called glabrous skin. And glabrous skin has really specific cold sensors or cold receptors to help my body to adjust body temperature accordingly. And so so cold alone was going to help to reinforce this, but specifically cold on the face and on those areas is especially important because it actually began to activate my paraventricular nucleus, and it actually helped to stimulate oxytocin release as well. Both of those things, the oxytocin release and the paraventricular nucleus stimulation, helped this part of my brain to reconnect and to start signaling appropriately again. So this is also why talking about this region of the brain, this is also why my clients who have nervous system dysregulation can benefit from the light, the meal timing, and even the cold face plunges as well. The face plunge is not an aggressive enough cold stimulus to feel like a nervous system stressor, but it does allow that part of the brain that receives inputs from both the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the nervous system to start communicating effectively again. The other thing that we get from cold exposure is we get the production in the brain of something called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that actually then helps to start repair and regenerate the neurons. It kicks off the pathway of neurogenesis so that that part of the brain can actually get strengthened again. And so, I was dealing with the adrenal glands through lowering inflammatory cascades in the body. So through controlling diet and leaky gut, which, helped a little bit. And I was really trying to support my adrenal glands with adaptogens. But the adaptogens could only work if the parts of my brain that were actually signaling cortisol release were active. And so this is where the light plus the things that stimulated the paraventricular nucleus played a key role in not only, reversing my adrenal fatigue, completely healing my body from adrenal fatigue, but then also allowing my body to continue to thrive and be an adaptive, a really resilient and adaptive individual when I'm facing perceived stressors. And so I highly encourage you, if this is intriguing, if this concept of the brain and the communication and the different pathways that we can support, and it's not just through cold, a lot of these pathways can get supported through exercise, for example, through meditation. And so I go over all of that in the Adrenal Fatigue Fix course. So if you're interested in learning about adrenal fatigue from a perspective that really just doesn't focus on the adrenal glands, I highly encourage you to do that deep dive into this course with me. But otherwise, I hope you learned something interesting today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.